I had been suffering on and off. It seemed like things were getting worse.
Stick the stethoscope in your ears with these things pointing forward. Go ahead, take a listen. I'll come back in a few minutes and we'll discuss what you hear.
I was very reluctant. I had certain apprehension about what would happen to me.
And we were alone.
I'm here for some pain.
Alone with the patient on the second day of medical school. Silence. Hello. A few instructions, a light pressure, hand on shoulder, metal on skin. Heartbeats.
Here we are.
I was taken into a room.
The only light in the room is the one behind the glass. Our black etching paper is on. It took a minute or two for our eyes to adjust. What do you want to draw?
That was a vulnerable moment for sure, hoping that the paper skittering out of the printer looked the way a 24-year-old's heart should.
Vulnerable.
Could be a synonym for awkward.
Mental or emotional nakedness.
Like being thrown into the deep end of the pool.
I have no idea what I'm doing. I can't even get the songs on my radio in the car right. How the heck am I going to rap in front of these kids? I felt vulnerable throughout the entire visit. I was worried if people would laugh. I felt stupid if my peers would make fun of me behind my back. I knew that to walk through the doors of that studio was to accept that I was not in charge, not in control, to accept that I was not going to be good at something that I probably was not going to get better at in the 2 hours that I was there, and I couldn't do anything about it. Vulnerable.
I sat and pretended to do work, rereading the same page over and over.
Not grew in my throat.
Listening to the footsteps come and go past my door.
The beat was loud.
Vulnerable. Capable of being physically or emotionally wounded.
Open to attack or damage.
What a strange thing it is to let someone intentionally cause you harm. I'm supposed to sit there and even joke with them as they pierce needles through my skin.
This was scary. When it was my turn, there was this very long, awkward pause, filled only by the beat that we created, that blaring through the speakers. I knew I needed to go, but I just couldn't figure out how to jump in and start on a beat. I eventually blurted out my lines, and I don't think that any of them fit in the beats or had any flow to them. There was a long silence after I finished, and it felt really long.
Vulnerable. To be honest and open. To be self-aware of the limitations of your knowledge and scope of experience. I am not very good with children. I watched very carefully to see how the children reacted to being assigned to me. Are they excited? Do they look dejected?
I felt confused, even ashamed that I had been admitted. The nurses kept saying how young I was to be in the hospital.
Do they look around the room instead of looking at me? My presence seems undesirable and unwanted.
When the doctor came, I listened and I tried to be brave.
How do you feel?
Fine? I didn't feel fine.
What level is your pain at?
A 3? It wasn't a 3.
What do you want to draw?
House?
Sounds good. What do you want me to draw?
A dog.
We continued from the house and the dog to a flower.
Mountains.
Birds.
A tree.
How about some clouds?
Sure.
You're good at drawing.
My writing teacher says that writers never give up.
Oh, do you like writing?
Yes.
How old are you?
5?
You're very wise. Are you sure you're not 8?
No, my sister is 8.
Most people approach kids with smiling faces, high fives, simple questions that they would know kids should know. This is not my approach. Working with him, I was fairly quiet. I asked him questions and he shared answers with me.
How do you like it?
It looks great.
You don't sound like you like it too much.
I meant what I said.
That's good. I felt vulnerable and young and nervous, and I wanted to be fine. As I lay in bed after everyone had left, my girlfriend had left, the doctors had left, the nurses had left, I regretted my false bravado.
It takes courage to be vulnerable.
Our task was to stitch our names into fabric squares, which would be incorporated into a community quilt. I was sitting next to two teens, talking while we worked.
You're rich. He's rich.
The teens thought that all CCLCM men volunteering were already doctors, all the women were already nurses. The fact that I was dressed in a collared shirt and dress pants, in contrast to their jeans and t-shirts, probably added to that notion. This experience may help me to better understand the community I'm working with. Spending time with them and conversing may have just allowed them to feel comfortable enough to freely say what they were already thinking upon seeing me.
Expressing vulnerability provides an avenue to connect with others.
The second session at Merrick House, I sat at a table with three girls. Two of the girls were obviously great friends, laughing and joking throughout the session. But the third girl was very quiet. She kept to herself. I remembered when I was younger and how shy and quiet I was around new people, and I assumed that she was feeling the same thing.
Last time she was very talkative and making jokes.
What might have happened that day? Was she depressed? Perhaps just tired?
Hi.
An older woman, about 80 years old, wearing street clothes. I was in a gown. I felt disheveled, and I certainly didn't know this person. Hi.
To be so full of life the week before and so withdrawn that day gave me the impression she was dealing with something.
Why are you in the hospital?
I was feeling taken aback. On one level, happy to interact with someone who genuinely seemed interested, and also guarded about such a blunt question.
She wanted to be in her own space.
We ended up talking for several minutes. She told me about her husband's failing organs as well as her own health woes, while I told her about mine. Still, though, I felt guarded.
I thought about the text messages she was sending. Is she arguing with someone? A friend or maybe a significant other?
I quickly, and I thought subtly, checked my phone. She said goodbye and shuffled away.
I did not ask what was wrong, or if anything was wrong.
I could see this woman was open to me, and it truly made me feel better. By resisting opening up to her, I deprived her of that connection she was seeking.
If anything were wrong, would I have been able to do anything?
The doctor decided, based on the blood tests and everything else, that I could go home. I was relieved, ready to be home.
At the Sight Center, one of the participants seated next to me was leaving. She placed her cane under the table when she arrived.
I gathered up my belongings.
She was using her foot to feel for her cane and could not find it.
I looked behind me to see if my friend would walk by as I was going. I should have said goodbye, or gone over to her bed, but I felt nervous.
I was unsure if I should get up for her or if I should let her find it on her own.
I wanted to go home. I didn't turn around or go back, but it was then that I felt frustrated at how vulnerable I was, how I refused to open up more, and how I missed an opportunity to possibly do good.
Is my cane in front of me? You don't need to pick it up. Just tell me, is it to the left or to the right?
It's to your right.
Vulnerability is not something that can be cultivated. Whether or not it should be cultivated is a much more complicated discussion.
There was a lot of emotional release that night. It was tumultuous across the country, with yet another jury decision not to charge a policeman for the death of a black man. One woman in particular shared her deep dismay and frustration. She was emotional and told of how much better it is today, but so much of the discrimination and lack of justice is soberingly similar.
Same old soup with a different spoon. Young people today do not realize how hard previous generations have fought.
Her willingness to share her emotions showed courage. Revealing emotions risks vulnerability.
I remember it was mid-morning, and I had just received my first medical school interview invite, interrupting my glee.
We're about to go into a very difficult situation. I'm going to have to tell the family of a 9-year-old girl that the child is terminal.
We walked into the room calmly, the doctor carrying a box of tissues. As he delivered the news in a calm, stable voice, the entire family started crying. The doctor handed them the box of tissues, and I tried my best to blend into the wall as I was forced to put the stresses of my life into context.
Vulnerability is an emotion that one feels. It's not a virtue to be cultivated, unless the term cultivated is applied in a way that is reminiscent of soil, with all that digging and churning and messiness. In order for me to be really vulnerable, really empathize with my patients who will one day feel vulnerable in my presence, then I must take the time to messily dig through all of my memories in those moments, bringing them to the surface of my consciousness, and truly feel that emotion with them.
I realized with great clarity in the days after my ER visit how my feelings of vulnerability shaped my experiences. I realized that my responses to my own vulnerability were actually detrimental. When the ER doctor asked how I was feeling, my reluctance to admit pain was a sort of defensive wall. It caused me a night of misery. My guardedness with this woman who was clearly anxious and looking for human connection was a reflection of my own unwillingness to expose my vulnerability at being in the ER, at being scared, at looking and feeling sick. Vulnerability is not something to be combated, but rather vocalized.
Being vulnerable has to be done. Sharing concerns and fears and imperfections. It builds relationships. It builds courage. Doing anything new, meeting anyone new, doing anything great, requires one step at a time into that vulnerable place.
A new city or environment, in familiar settings with new situations, a difficult, possibly ethical situation that you haven't encountered before.
The people I met in the ER would have connected with that, and it would have helped me, if not them, as well.
Vulnerability keeps the aspect of humanism in medicine. It is important to understand and embrace it.
At the most basic level, my experience put me in the shoes of my patients. I do know how it feels to be them.